10,000 Tacticus. Use code JULYHELLO to get 50 Blackstone and 20 energy free when you register. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last weekend of competitive play, talk about what's doing well in the metagame, and today's going to be a little bit of a lighter weekend for this week, especially over here in the States. It was a holiday weekend, so not a ton of events went down, but we did have the Leeds GT, a super major level event that did generate a ton of interesting results for the meta that we'll certainly be discussing. Now, with that, let's move over to a metagame breakdown. We can see that the usual suspects are still near the top, although there is a new interesting player near the top of the leaderboard here. Imperial Knights took down two events, both the Geelong 40k Town Open as well as Tormenta de Hostias. We also saw Chaos Knights doing pretty well, taking down the Dierg Doom 3. But this newcomer to the game is Chaos Space Marines. They also went undefeated at the Tormenta de Hostias, but also at the Dragon's Horde GT. That's going to be an interesting thing to discuss. We definitely see a little bit of counterplay between the new Lord Discordant datasheet that Chaos Space Marines got access to and the newfound focus on vehicles that the metagame has, with Imperial Knights being so strong. Those datasheets are only good against vehicles, and the strongest faction of the game right now only brings vehicles, so a match made in heaven. The Leeds Super Major, as I discussed before, was won by Ultramarines, an interesting Ultramarine Stormlance build that we have talked about on the series previously, but we'll dive into as well this time. The Zunobi Malaysian Nationals Finals event was won by Adeptus Custodes. That was a much smaller event, but I figured I would add it in here because we don't have too many other events to talk about. The Leighton Gaming event was won by Genestealer Cults, and we see Challenger cards now kind of making their impact on the game, with a lot more draws now occurring at these top tables than we saw previously. This includes an X0-1 result at the Copenhagen Chainsword GT. There are actually multiple undefeated at that event, but we're going to talk about the top number one placer here, Aeldari. We also saw an X0-1 at the Geelong 40k Town Open. That was Dark Angels. There were other Dark Angels X0-1s elsewhere as well that also saw these draws, I think, in differential scoring formats. The CQ Exterminatus event saw a draw in the finals. That was a tie between Death Guard and Tau Empire. Certainly an interesting result there, and we'll talk about both of those lists today, as well as Adepta Sororitas taking down the 2025 Goonhammer Open with an X0-1 result. So everyone else at the event had a loss on their record. Only Adepta Sororitas came out with only wins and draws. Now, I will mention that only the Copenhagen Chainsword GT, we used differential scoring out of all these ones that we're talking about. I'm not including differential score XO-1 results in most of these results now because they are so common. If differential scoring is being used, it's very easy when you are using a challenger card system to hit a 10-10 result using that system. So that is certainly happening at a greater and greater occurrence. So I won't be discussing those results. I'll only be discussing XO-1 results moving on into the future that either won or tied for first place in the event. Now, with that, let's talk about where to watch these games. Now, the Leeds GT actually had quite a bit of coverage on it. The UK TC TV channel streamed the entire thing. I think that's the UK Tournament Circuit's official YouTube channel, which is cool. I didn't know they had that one. But they have the entire event on live stream. Boltgun Tactics was also there, live streaming their games live from their table, which I think is rad. So go check both of those out. Now, if you want more live stream coverage, please join me for the ATC, American Team Championship, next weekend. I'm going to be live Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll have stream events go up for that on the channel shortly. On top of that, if you're also interested in online play, I am running a grand tournament that is going to be launching this week. It is free to join. However, there will be door prizes if you are interested for the players who complete all 5 games of the event. We currently have over 100 players signed up to play, and registration and list lock for that closes this coming Friday at midnight US Eastern Time. So please come register for that. Now, with that, all the housekeeping out of the way, let's get into these lists just after a word from our sponsor.
This video is brought to you by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. As the name implies, Tacticus is a tactical skirmish combat game set in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium that's available for your mobile device, that will not infect your device with the Dark Mechanicum engineered technovirus. The game represents units and powerful characters from the 41st millennium with a series of champions who are modeled after their original physical representations. This makes it easy to identify and learn the silhouettes of all of these different units. Some of these champions represent squad leaders, and one thing I appreciate about the representation is that while the game is very low unit count, you'll only be playing 4 or 5 champions per team, they represent bringing their squad together as special abilities that will summon units over the course of the game. One thing I really like about the game is that it will not infect your mobile device with some sort of Dark Mechanicum engineered technovirus. Another thing I appreciate about Tacticus is that it plays on vertical mode. As someone who does not play mobile games very often, so I lack the Astartes level wrist strength to hold my phone sideways for extended periods of time, being able to hold it vertically when I play games of Tacticus is appreciated. Tacticus is also celebrating the release of a brand new faction. You can now play the superhuman defenders of the Adeptus Custodes, including champions like Captain General Trajan Valoris, as well as units like Vixilus Praetors within the game. Another thing I appreciate about Tacticus is that it will not infect your device with the Dark Mechanicum engineered technovirus, so check out my links in the video description to download Tacticus today and not to download a Dark Mechanicum engineered technovirus. If you join now, you'll be just in time for the new release events for the Adeptus Custodes faction, and you'll avoid any Dark Mechanicum engineered technoviruses. So thanks to Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out, and let's get back to the video.
Now we're going to start our discussion here in Spain for the GT Tormenta de Hostias. This event was won by Pomork, who was playing Imperial Knights to a 5-0 record. Also, this event was large enough to see 2 undefeated players, Chaos Space Marines also going undefeated. However, today we're going to be covering the Imperial Knights. Now, while a lot of the more competitive Imperial Knights builds currently are focusing on kind of a mix of super heavies and armatures, taking enough super heavy chassis to open up some slots for armatures, this one's a little bit more focused on the super heavies, which is not something we see typically from the Imperial Knight builds. This includes Canis Rex, a Knight Errant with Mysterious Guardian, so he can teleport around the battlefield. Another Knight Errant, that one with Banner of Macarius Triumphant, both of these equipped with thermal cannons and Reaper chainswords. I think that thermal cannon profile actually kind of spicy into opposing super heavies now that they wound them a little bit more easily. So that could be nice with that big damage Melta attack. Last and certainly not least, we also see a Knight Gallant, the melee or focused knight running a chainsword and Thunderstrike Gauntlet. Following that up, we have several Armiger Helverins. That's 3 Armiger Helverins plus an Armiger Warglaive. So a total of 8 models in the army, 4 super heavies and 4 armigers. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on Imperial Knights. It's a pretty straightforward faction, but I do want to move over to Naples, Florida for the Twin Dragon Games Dragon's Horde July GT. So try saying that 5 times fast. This was a smaller event, 26 players, but it was run by Paul Roberts running Chaos Space Marines to a 5-0 record. I guess kind of ironically, we also saw Imperial Knights in 2nd place here, so it was just a reversal of the finish of the previous event we discussed, although obviously the Imperial Knights didn't go undefeated. Now, Paul was playing a really interesting Chaos Space Marine build. This is a Renegade Raiders build, so this is the sort of speed-focused detachment that gives you bonuses when you attack enemies on objectives, gives the entire army assault on all of its ranged weapons. What a phenomenal detachment ability. This includes a Chaos Lord, Cypher, a Lord Discordant on Hellstalker with Dread Reaver that gives him full rerolls when he's near your opponent's deployment zone. That is very effective on him because he is a very aggressive profile, so he can move quickly enough to get into that position. There's very rarely that the Lord Discordant gets stuck too far away from your opponent's table aside in order to benefit from that Dread Reaver. And once that guy has rerolls, he's attacking with a kind of mid-strength weapon with Lance, which means he wounds most things on 4s. Once he gets full rerolls on top of that, plus sustained hits or lethal hits, whatever he's Dark Pacting for, he starts to go kind of crazy. So the new Lord Discordant profile, definitely kind of a big deal. These guys will also be inflicting mortal wounds to vehicles nearby them, giving them hit penalties. But this profile, able to go up to potentially AP4 when it targets an enemy on objectives, with potential rerolls from Dread Reaver, is an impressive one. The speed and the limited level of resilience, especially because this detachment has an Armor of Contempt equivalent, so the Lord Discordant is going to be able to be slightly tanky with its 2+ base armor save, is actually pretty impressive. Now from there, we also have Vashtor the Archifane. This guy had got a huge glow up in the most recent update as well. He got a huge damage glow up on his melee weapon, not to mention the fact that he now gives demon engines +2 strength while nearby him, meaning that Vashtor plus 1 or 2 Forge Fiends just operating as a little independent package, with Vashtor being a lone operative until those things die, allowing him to move up the table, buff those units until he's in a position to get up and charge, is a really nice little sort of inclusion. He also gets Forge Fiends in specific up to strength 12, which is a huge breakpoint. We'll see if we have any of those in the army. Yeah, we do have a Forge Fiend there. That's a package that we often see is just the one Forge Fiend plus Vashtor. It's not a huge investment, so if you run into profiles that the Forge Fiend's not super great at killing, you're not over committed to it. But for 355 points, you get a lone operative character who's always useful to have, plus you get a 3d3 strength 12 ranged attacker with all the benefits that Forge Fiends have, which is incredibly terrifying. So, especially once we're talking about dealing with T12 profiles, once this guy starts firing, getting sustained hits from Dark Pacts, getting that +2 strength, and wounding a lot of vehicles on 3s, he goes kind of insane. We then, from there, have a Cultist Mob, plus a Legionary Squad, 2 Chaos Rhinos, as well as a unit of Chaos Bikers, 2 Chaos Vindicators to add some additional shooting to the army, and allies in the form of 2 units of Noise Marines and a Beast of Nurgle and a Nurgling unit. So a little bit of forward operation from those demon allies, but the big benefit here is that the Noise Marines have almost perfect synergy with the Renegade Raiders detachment ability. They obviously lose their army ability from Emperor's Children once they ally into Chaos Space Marines, so they aren't able to advance, shoot, and charge like they are in Emperor's Children. However, they gain Assault thanks to the detachment ability, and they can embark in Rhinos. They gain potential +1 AP when targeting enemies on objectives, and they can even fire out of the firing deck of those Rhinos to get Dark Pact. So the Rhino will Dark Pact and then assume 2 of the ranged weapons from the units firing out of its firing deck. So a single Noise Marine squad embarked into a Rhino can fire 2 Blastmasters out the top with potentially +1 AP and either sustained or lethal hits, which makes it a really interesting little gunboat of a unit. And even once these guys start to disembark and just shoot things normally, they become really powerful. They are another kind of piece of anti-knight technology because they are a very good profile to kill armigers in specific. If you are attacking an armiger on an objective, you are right at the correct breakpoints where all of their guns, because they're AP1 or AP2 ignore cover, put the armiger chassis onto its invulnerable save without very much lost efficiency from the higher AP Blastmasters. And all of it is either high volume that wounds on 5s, so all of the Sonic Blasters, for example, or lower volume but wounds on 3s like the Blastmasters. So the change of the armiger from T10 down to T9 makes Noise Marines almost perfectly suited to killing them. So a lot of really interesting little pieces of technology that we have access to in these styles of lists. And between the Lord Discordance, between the Vashtor plus the Forge Fiend combo, between the Noise Marines, they're well-rounded. Obviously, the Lord Discordant profile now is pretty good at clearing heavy infantry. He's a fast unit, so pretty solid at utility. On top of that, the Noise Marines are good against most targets, and the Forge Fiend can shoot into infantry with Blast if it needs to as well. So a lot of the stuff can pull double duty, but it also has a lot of really interesting statistical improvements into the Knight Menace. Now, from there, we're going to move over to the United Kingdom for the 286-player Leeds GT. This was a super major level event, and while it did play to a top cut with 2 undefeated remaining, there were a lot of really interesting results from these lower-ranked players. I will be discussing those on a live stream shortly after this video releases, so if you are available, that will be at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time later on today, then we could discuss those lists. But at the very least, we're going to talk about the top 2, Josh Roberts playing Ultramarines and Ratnu Vaidya running Chaos Knights. Now, Josh was playing an Ultramarines Stormlands Task Force, and this is not the first time we've seen these styles of armies take to the table. They were actually relatively common. We saw a lot of success from John Lennon playing these styles of lists, but it looks like Josh Roberts has sort of taken the mantle there. The Stormlands Task Force obviously gives the entire army advance and charge, which is super helpful for Robute Gilliman. Having access to that makes him very good in the late game. It can also also grant assault to its ranged weapons for a command point, so it's able to kind of ape a lot of the benefits that Gladius Task Force has. The other benefit is that it has incredibly resilient flying units, able to use ride hard, ride fast to give them -1 to hit and wound. We're taking in this particular variety a combi weapon lieutenant, as well as Marneus Calgar, Rabuta Gilliman, and Uriel Ventress. Ventress is a nice inclusion because he's able to teleport these units around the battlefield, and he can also affect Marneus Calgar with that buff now, because you're not in danger of losing Calgar's command point generation. So you could even use him to rapid ingress in and get really scary threats into your opponent's backline. We have some shooting presented by 2 units of Ballistus Dreadnoughts, plus a company hero squad for Calgar to jump into. We do have a single Eradicator squad, which is also a nice reserve piece, potentially. On top of a scout squad, a Stern Guard veteran squad that is a good delivery system for something like Uriel Ventress to gain rerolls from. When he targets the Oath of Moment target, he can gain hit and wound rerolls. Alongside those Stern Guard veterans, they're a nice little, kind of an equivalent to a company hero squad or a Blade Guard veteran squad, or even something smaller like an Intercessor squad, but they provide that little bit of additional damage amp, which is cool. We have 3 Storm Speeder Hammer Strikes, as well as a Storm Raven gunship pulling up the rear. So the Hammer Strikes obviously are able to trade up really heavily, especially alongside the double Oath of Moment that you're gaining from Rabute Gilliman, who can kind of play a little aggressively because of the combi weapon lieutenant. He can make both of those guys lone operatives so they can sort of wander around wherever they're needed. Gilliman's also going to be able to generate you that free stratagem every battle round, which you can use on the -1 to hit and wound, either on the Hammer Strikes if you're pushing them forward, or on the Storm Raven gunship, which is also coincidentally -1 damage, and can either deliver units like the Stern Guard veterans, the Eradicators, or the company heroes, or those can be delivered by Uriel Ventress and his Deep Strike. You could also, I guess, embark one of the Ballistus Dreadnoughts into it to give it a little bit of extra movement on turn 1, potentially, if you want to, which is kind of cute. Now, moving back to the top cut, we also have Ratnu Vaidya running Chaos Knights here. Ratnu was running an Infernal Lance. This is one of the more interesting and esoteric detachments coming out of the Chaos Knights Codex. It allows you to make a Malefic Surge once in each of your command phases, which you can then expend later on during the turn to either buff the damage output, maneuverability, or survivability of your big knights. It does come with the chance of taking D3 mortal wounds on a failed leadership test, which is unfortunate, but generally speaking, that's not the biggest downside for these big Titanic Super Heavies. The other benefit that we have in this detachment is that it is basically the most defensive detachment that the Chaos Knights have access to. It has several stratagems like Hellforged Construction for a fight phase Armor of Contempt, and Diabolic Bulwark for a shooting phase 4+ invulnerable save that can help keep the knights alive for longer, especially if you are using Malefic Surge to provide them unnatural fortitude. If that's the case, then you actually get a slightly harder to kill version of Imperial Knights, although at the downside that you may be taking some mortal wounds over the course of the game. Now, with this, Ratnu was focusing very heavily on the big super heavies, taking 4 super heavies, as well as a smattering of demon allies and some war dogs. This includes a Cerastus Knight Atropos, 2 Knight Despoilers, both of those running Despoiler Gatling cannons for their solid, well-rounded offensive profile. You can also gain either lethal or sustained hits on these things with by expending a Malefic Surge in the shooting phase, which on a high-volume weapon like that can go quite a long way. We can also pay a command point for Warp Vision to grant one of these things Ignore Cover, which can get around the one downside that the Gatling cannon may have against high armor save enemies, where its AP2 is good if you are not benefiting from cover, because most enemies will be saving on 4s or 5s. As soon as an enemy is in cover, they're saving on 3s or 4s, and oftentimes can blank a lot of that damage if your wound roll isn't great. However, if you Warp Vision, you're going to shoot straight through that cover, and to even start to pile damage into heavier targets with 2+ armor saves. We then have a Knight Rampager for some backline melee attacking, and following that up are 3 War Dog Carnivores, plus 2 units of Beasts of Nurgle, 2 individuals there, and 2 units of Nurglings to act as utility. Pretty cool to see Infernal Lance at the top tables here. I think there's been a lot of discourse around Lords of Dread for this detachment, for this faction, because of the amount of objective control it has, but definitely the top line profiles of the Infernal Lance Knights are very scary. They're basically harder to kill than Imperial Knights if they want to be, but with the opportunity to switch that ability for enhanced movement, enhanced damage, with the minor downside that occasionally they take D3 mortal wounds, which isn't the biggest of deals. Now, moving on, we're going to go all the way over to Malaysia to talk about the Zunobi Golden Ticket Malaysian National Finals. This was a smaller event, only 19 players, but given that it's a quiet week and the fact that it's cool to talk about events happening in Kuala Lumpur, which we don't get to do often, I'd like to cover it. The event was won by Daniel Tan running Adeptus Custodes. Daniel was running a Lions of the Emperor detachment. This includes a Blade Champion, Shield Captain in Alaris Terminator armor. He's got the Castellan Axe as well as Admana Mortis to make use of that axe's high damage output. Downside, obviously, is that the axe, it doesn't have the greatest AP value in the world, but Admana Mortis can get around that weakness. We have 2 Shield Captains with John Eagle jet bikes, one of them with Praesidius, in order to give him Lone Operative and Stealth, so he can operate by himself without having to attach into any other Dawn Eagle Jetbike units. From there, we have a unit of Custodian Guard, plus a single unit of Alaris Custodians, double Caladius Grav Tanks to add a little bit of shooting to the back line. Obviously, these guys do not get the benefit of the detachment ability, but if we are talking about a situation where we do have to deal with super heaviest like Knights constantly, Caladius Grav Tanks are actually going to be a pretty important piece of technology. They can sit in the back, constantly be piling damage into those Knights who usually will have to deal with the Custodian Guards in front of them first before they're able to get all the way into the back to deal with those Grav Tanks. One interesting thing about Knight profiles, mostly, especially Imperial Knights, is that they do tend to be relatively short range, only about 24 inches in most cases, which means they can be wildly outranged by the Caladius Grav Tanks if the terrain allows, which allows them to poke at these big super heavies from pretty far away. From there, we also have 2 units of Prosecutors for utility, plus 1 Virtus Praetor squad that's 2 Virtus Praetors to attach that non-enhanced Shield Captain into. Those Shield Captains will obviously provide to themselves and their attached unit their once per game ability to move after attacking in the fight phase, or move at the end of the fight phase, I should say, which is incredibly useful to keep these units alive or to score secondary objectives over the course of the game, and can be restocked for use again with Gilded Champion. We then have a Witch Seeker squad, as well as Inquisitor Kyria Draxus to attach into the Custodian Guard squads, a combo that I hope I don't have to explain anymore. Very cool to see Adeptus Custodes do well, and it's also cool to see some events go down in Malaysia. It's really cool just how global Warhammer 40k has become. Congratulations to Daniel Tan for taking down that golden ticket. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the 47-player Leighton Gaming 40k event held in Altamonte Springs, Florida. This event was won by Tucker Ricky, who we actually watched live on this channel before, but playing Genestealer Cults. Tucker was running a host of Ascension, a detachment that we've seen occasionally on and off for the last couple of weeks. Some players thought that this would be kind of like God's gift to the Knight meta in a way that it would sort of destroy them and be incredibly powerful in that matchup. I don't know if that's really manifested yet. They may be good at the matchup and just lose to other matches, or it could just be that they're not quite popular enough yet for them to really like start taking things by storm. But obviously, Host of Ascension is good into a wide variety of situations if you don't have either the infantry sweeping to deal with it and or the screening to stop it from shooting you to death. This includes an Acolyte Icon Ward with Prowling Adjutant, a Benefictus with Assassination Edict to get that wound bonus against characters, plus another second Benefictus and a Primus with Chink in their armor for the lethal hits for his unit. You also can get Primed and Ready for 5-up criticals, you get Sustained Hits for coming out of reserve, and you can get full hit rerolls thanks to the Primus's attachment ability. So that unit is an incredible amount of damage. Interestingly, we also then have a Keller Morph as well as 3 Reductus Saboteurs for utility. We have several Acolyte Hybrid squads, including 1 Auto Pistol squad to hold down the backline, plus 3 units of Acolyte Hybrids with Hand Flamers to fight over midboard objectives. We then have a bunch of Neophyte Hybrids, 4 units of 20 Neophyte Hybrids. Those are equipped with Grenade Launchers, Mining Lasers, Seismic Cannons, and Webbers. So a total of 80 hybrids to attach the Beneficti as well as the Primus. We then have a trio of Achilles Ridge Runners to provide Crossfire, 2 of those equipped with Spotters for better indirect fire shooting, 1 of them with a Survey Augur to strip cover for units that are on the battlefield to begin with. We then have an Attilan Jackal Squad for some scouting, plus a unit of Hybrid Metamorphs for some late-game counterpunch, and 2 units of Pure Strain Genestealers to kill enemy utility units and clear out enemy screens. Now with that, we're going to move all the way over over to the other side of the planet, over in Australia, Rockhampton City, Queensland, to talk about the CQ Exterminatus tournament. This was a 40-player GT and was won by Death Guard, which is lame, but the final results saw a draw in the finals game, a 78-point draw between Gavin Bube and Robert Logan. Now, we're going to start briefly by talking about Gavin Bube's Champions of Contagion list. Now, this is a detachment that kind of got a lot of play at the very beginning of the Death Guard Codex, but has really been overshadowed by Virulent Victorium as well as Mortarian's Hammer. But it is a extremely straightforward detachment. It gives you the opportunity to switch up your Contagions of Nurgle throughout the game. You can choose a new one every battle round instead of just choosing one at the start of the game. Plus, it can improve the survivability of your units by giving you fights first in melee if you're an attached unit, or a toughness bonus. It has a lot of synergy with Plague Marines and Terminators, and it's incredibly straightforward. It's very good if you are just learning Death Guard, and I will be talking about it in more depth later this week because I'm going to be doing a Death Guard getting started video. This list in particular is running a pair of Lords of Contagion as well as a Lord of Virulence. Interestingly, it is also running Typhus, but 2 Tally Men. I'm definitely interested in the inclusion of multiple Tally Men. They are very cheap. They're only 40 points for a dude with a pistol who can potentially wander around and do actions. So as a utility unit, they may actually be kind of sweet. The other thing, too, is that it gives you more opportunities to generate yourself command points at the start of the turn if you have multiple Tally Men on the battlefield. It also lets you play a little bit more fast and loose with one of them if you are in a situation where your Warlord being alive is important. So, for example, if the Tally Man is the Warlord and our opponent is playing Imperial Knights, they get a bonus if they destroy the Warlord. So if they're able to get around, get a Mysterious Guardian activation or something into the back line where they can shoot the Tally Man or fight the Tally Man, losing the Warlord early is unfortunate, so that guy could just hide in reserve and come in on the battlefield at a later time in order to then dodge that potential attack. We have 2 units of 2 Chaos Spawn alongside 3 units of Death Rod Terminators. That's 2 units of 3, as well as 1 larger unit of 6 to be a big hammer unit. We have a bunch of Fetid Blow Drones. One of them is a standard blow drone with 2 Plague Spitters, so that's the anti-infantry torrent weapon, alongside 3 of them with heavy Blight Launchers for some backline shooting to combo alongside the Lord of Contagion. Then we also have 3 Mephitic Blight Haulers alongside 2 units of 10 Poxwalkers. So not a lot of attachments for things like the Tally Man. I do imagine that we are using one of them as a little bit of a utility piece for only 40 points. He's one of the cheapest data sheets, or indeed might be the cheapest data sheet in the Codex besides Nurglings, I guess, if you are playing the Demon detachment, which no single human has ever done, so we don't have to worry about that. That's fine. Which gives the unit a little bit more reach out of strategic reserve than I guess we would normally have. Pretty cool to see Champions of the Contagion on the table. It's nice to see a little bit of a shift up from just the standard Mortarian's Hammer, which it feels like has been every list in the last couple of weeks. Now we're going to move back to Robert Logan, who also went second place at this event at a 4-0-1 result with a 78-point draw in the final game here. Now, I know a very ill-tempered Fireblade in the comment section here who's probably going to be excited about this particular variety of list because this is a KROOT hunting pack. This includes a KROOT Warshaper with KROOT Hawk Flock that can prevent enemies from reserving within 12 inches of him, so he can hide in the back potentially and just generate an anti-reserve aura, which is going to be helpful. We then have a unit of KROOT Carnivores, 3 Hammerhead Gunships, and look at that, glorious 18 KROOTOX Rampagers, following that up with 9 KROOTOX Riders, 3 more Skyray Gunships, as well as 3 units of 3 Stealth Battlesuits. And that's it! That's the entire list. It is basically a max field allowance of Stealth Battleships, Skyray Gunships, Hammerhead Gunships, and all KROOTOX. Any variety of KROOTOX we can get. Now, the benefit here is that the KROOTOX units themselves become very annoying to deal with in this detachment. In KROOT Hunting Pack, they get invulnerable saves, and the mass of wounds that you're able to put on the center of the battlefield from very early in this detachment is so difficult for a lot of armies to deal with. Oftentimes, you have to overextend into these KROOT Rampager units in order to actually deal with them, which simply brings you into line of sight of 6 railguns and 6 sets of seeker missiles, which is an absolutely punishing amount of counterattack. Not to mention the fact that if you are bringing low model count, high impact armies, something with a bunch of super heavies, for example, you can get a lot of work out of the spotting mechanic from those stealth battlesuits. All you need is 3 stealth battlesuits to see 3 separate units, and suddenly every single one of those hammerheads and skyrays is going to be buoyed up against those targets. From there, if you're not able to deal with the KROOTOX, which oftentimes you have to do, the KROOTOX actually hit relatively hard in melee, and so they're going to be able to deal with a lot of really midline profiles pretty effectively while you are trying to get through them to actually get to all of these gunships. Very cool to see these varieties of Tau on the table. I know that not a lot of people do play the KROOT Hunting Pack because they may not necessarily like the style of gameplay that KROOT Hunting Pack espouses, but it is nonetheless incredibly effective. When you see this army on the battlefield, it's crazy. The number of models that you have and the volume of the army is enormous. Now with that, we're going to move over to Maryland to talk about the 2025 Goon Hammer US Open. This was a 38-player GT and had a similar situation to the CQ Exterminatus because it also ended with an XO-1 player at the finals here. This was Jeffrey Kolodner, who ended 4-0-1, beating out everyone else for a finals placement. It looks like, hilariously, Jeffrey did tie with Steven Davis in round 2, a 95-point draw. I don't know the situation in which you scored 95 points in draw. That's insane. One of those high-scoring games I've ever in 40k I've seen. But still, congratulations to Jeff for taking this one down with 4 additional wins over the course of the rest of the weekend. Now, Jeffrey was playing a Hallowed Martyrs detachment. This is the detachment we talked, I think, about quite a bit here, which gives you bonuses when your units are below starting strength and also allows you to regenerate your characters. Now, to that end, we're playing a Canoness with a Blessed Blade, a Imagifier, Judith Aeroita for CP regeneration, Morven Vol, as well as a Palatine with Through Suffering Strength to amp her damage output, a second Standard Palatine, alongside 2 Battle Sister Squads, 2 Immolators, 3 Mortifiers, a unit of 3 Paragon Warsuits, and 1 unit of Celestian Sacrosancts, as well as a Sister Novitiate Squad. The Immolators are very useful in here for their ability to combat squad a lot of these larger units. Something that oftentimes happens is that we see things like the Battle Sister Squads get combat squadded into a unit to sit on the home objective, as well as a unit running multi-meltas and either flamers or melta-guns to act as more of a combat unit. The other thing that could potentially happen is also using the Sister Novitiates to combat squad through those Immolators and give you 1 unit that you can attach a Palatine into to give her hit rerolls, and then a second unit that can infiltrate up the table because the Novitiates do infiltrate in order to give you some early game objective scoring. So there's a lot of really interesting selections that you can make in here depending on the exact composition of your opponent's army and where your Palatines go within those units versus a Canoness that can also either attach in the unit or attach along or embark alongside the unit into an Immolator to then be brought to the battle, jump out, use her 2+ invulnerable save to tank a phase of attacking, and then move on and potentially a Divine Intervention to respawn herself and just be a really annoying utility piece that nobody really wants to interact with. That's going to pull a lot of focus from your Castigators and your Paragon Warsuits, who can then do sort of the real heavy lifting of the army. Oh, last but certainly not least here, what we should mention as well is there's the Calidus Assassin for some backline objective scoring too. Missed that lady down there. Sorry, Madeline. You're okay. Good job scoring points. Scoring a 95-point tie, apparently. Hopefully that Calidus Assassin put her work in. Holy crap. Now, with that, I want to move over to an event that we already talked about briefly, but we haven't actually gone through. The Geelong 40k Town Open, which was a 61-player GT held in Australia. Now, this event was won by Imperial Knights. It was a 3 super heavy Imperial Knight build, but the second place placer was Jamie Wood playing Dark Angels, which I do want to talk about. Now, Jamie did go 4-0-1, but did go undefeated, and there were no other players at X-0-1 at that undefeated bracket. Now, Jamie was playing a Wrath of the Rock army. This is the new detachment that gives you a defensive bonus on all of your infantry and mounted units, -1 to be wounded if the strength characteristic of an incoming attack is higher than your toughness characteristic, which, to be fair, for most infantry and mounted units is just universally -1 to be wounded, which is a phenomenal detachment ability and makes this one of the better detachment abilities in the Space Marine Codex for sure. This was being led by Asriel. We also saw Lionel Johnson in there, who's just a nice sort of lone character now. If you are playing some more defensively oriented melee units, he can sort of embed himself within them and be a very strong counterattack option. He can threaten heroic intervention better than almost anyone in the game because of how high his damage output is and also his fights first ability. But you can also use him to do things like pick himself up in the early game and then rapid ingress into your opponent's backline, which can really mess with your opponent's ability to deal with where the line could potentially arrive. We also have a Chaplain in Terminator armor, 1 Justiciar with ancient weapons to buff his melee profile, plus a lieutenant with tempered in battle. That's a reroll battle shock test aura within 6 inches, which is largely a points filler. I think the army would not have been at 2,000 without it. We have an Intercessor squad plus a unit of 5 Deathwing Knights, interestingly, a big Hellblaster squad that could attach in with Azrael and the lieutenant. We don't have anything like enhanced critical effects in this army, but getting things like sustain plus lethal hits from the 2 characters attaching, not to mention the fact that you could use Relics of the Dark Age to bump the damage or the strength of those Hellblasters up to strength 10, makes that unit actually pretty scary when you combine it with all the character synergies. We do have a unit of 6 Inner Circle companions, which if I had to hazard a guess is probably where the Justiciar is attaching. So we have another melee sort of counterpunch unit there, plus 1 Scout Squad, 1 Invader ATV for utility, and some backline shooting provided by a Gladiator Lancer and a Repulsor Executioner. Last and certainly not least, we had a Calexis Assassin for utility and some primary objective control. This is a really interesting variety of this army. We have a couple of interesting inclusions are the vehicles. We don't typically see those very often in Wrath of the Rock detachments. However, you do get Tactical Mastery, which allows you to advance, shoot, and charge with any unit. It gets an extra bonus if you are a Raven Wing unit, but you don't necessarily need to be a Raven Wing unit in order to benefit from it, which gives these big vehicles a little bit more aggressive play than they would normally have. The Repulsor Executioner also has a transport capacity of 7, so it can by itself deliver things like the Inner Circle Companions plus the Justiciar, which makes it kind of an interesting combat transport. It can kind of play around the midboard, not necessarily quite as aggressively as you would like a Land Raider Redeemer or a Repulsor, but it can send these guys in because we can also pay a CP to advance and charge in this detachment. It can threaten to send these guys into the middle of the table pretty effectively. It also gives you a really annoying disembark if the Repulsor Executioner gets destroyed. Obviously, if you have an embarked unit with a transport like the Executioner and he's, let's say, holding your backline objective, one way you would deal with that is shoot the Executioner to death, force the units embarked to disembark, and then charge them and kill them. But if the thing that you just charged is a Justiciar-equipped Inner Circle Companion squad, there's a non-zero chance that they just kill you with fights first before you actually get to do anything to them. So that's a pretty interesting little piece of technology there. I wonder if that's indeed how that got used. I don't believe that there's any other way to transport those guys to the battlefield. So I think that that's just most likely where they're starting, at least to give them a little bit of a threat range amp from the early game. And then from there, we have some additional disruption, potentially from things like the Hellblaster squad with the lieutenants who can come in at a strategic reserve or just use their natural mobility to kind of engage with units in the center of the table. Plus, we have Lionel Johnson who can either up down himself around the battlefield or he can hang out with the Deathwing Knights. They're going to be able to provide him lone operative in addition to being a bulwark that he can protect with his own heroic intervention threat. Now, with that, we're going to move over to the last list of the weekend. This was at the Copenhagen Chainsword GT, a 33-player GT being held in Denmark. And this event was won by Keely Pask running Aeldari. We also saw Dark Angels with an XO1 result at the end here. And to be fair, both of the top placers here were XO1, but obviously we're just going to talk about the top placing player this time around because this was a differential scoring event. Now, Keely was playing a Guardian Battlehost. For those who don't know, this detachment is really weird. It gives your Dire Avengers, Guardians, Support Weapons, and Warwalkers +1 to hit if they target enemies that are on objective markers. And there is a little bit of an objective marker control theme in this army. Now, a big part of the power of this detachment is the cost of victory stratagem. It's only a 1 command point stratagem that at the end of your opponent's fight phase allows you to redeploy a Guardian unit. So you can pick it up off the battlefield and place it into strategic reserve to then come off a table edge in a future turn. The caveat, however, is that it fully replenishes every lost Guardian back to the unit when you do this. So if you have Guardian units that are exceptionally difficult to kill by stacking multiple defensive benefits, it's difficult to actually get rid of every Guardian in that unit. So even if you've killed 9 out of the 10 Guardians inside the squad, cost of victory will sort of replenish all of those, even if there are still other models in the squad or even other stuff that you have lost previously. So these Guardian units become very difficult bulwarks to kill, and they become very good delivery systems for units like Warlock Conclaves, which can provide their Destructor Torrents and amp themselves up pretty significantly by having a bunch of Warlocks nearby. Now, the army is playing Ashermen as well as Eldrad Ulthran, plus plus a Farseer and 2 individual character warlocks. The character warlocks can potentially dual attach with Autarchs or Farseers, which includes the standard Farseer as well as Eldrad Ulthran, and gives enemies -2 to charge the unit in addition to providing their own empowered destructor attack. So in addition to being difficult to interact with potentially because of how voluminous, and if we're adding any additional defensive benefits to these Guardian units, they're very difficult to kill. You can, on top of that, also be difficult to charge thanks to these warlocks, which just allows that defensive technology to go even farther. From there, we have a unit of Corsair Void Reavers for some utility, plus a big unit of 10 Guardian Defenders and a unit of 10 Storm Guardians. We do have a Wave Serpent, likely for Asherman's unit to hop in and out of. Yeah, we're rocking 10 Dire Avengers with that guy. He can give them the ability to move after shooting, so they're going to be able to hop out, do a bunch of damage with their shooting attacks, and then move back and jump back into the Wave Serpent. They also get that +1 to hit because they're Dire Avenger units when targeting enemies on objectives, which can make that unit a little bit more efficient. We have 2 D-Cannon support weapon platforms. These guys could also attach into the Guardian squads to either soak damage or provide their own fire support. We have a unit of 5 Fire Dragons to add some anti-tank, plus 1 unit of Howling Banshees, 1 unit of Rangers for early game infiltration, 2 units of Shroud Runners to appeal cover off of enemies, make your Guardians and your Destructor Torrents a little bit more effective. The Destructor is actually a little bit idiosyncratically an AP1 torrent that does not ignore cover, which means most of the time enemies will be benefiting from cover. If you can pump that AP value up at all, they become pretty effective. Last but certainly not least, we also have 2 Warwalkers, 2 units of 2 Warlock Skyrunners for utility, 45-point jet bike units that can wander around and perform actions, plus 2 Warlock Conclaves. So we can attach those Warlock Conclaves, or embed those Warlock Conclaves, I should say, into the Guardian squads to give them a -1 to wound effect, plus increase the size of the unit, plus give them some damage output from those destructors. These guys can embed inside those Guardian units and become a part of the unit, which can then be joined by other characters. So each one of these units can have 2 of these Warlocks in it, plus another character Warlock, plus a Farseer. So each of the Guardian units becomes then 15 models strong, potentially, because you're also adding a support weapon from the D-Cannon, plus the 2 embedded units, plus the 2 characters, which is just an immense amount of additional value inside of each of these squads, and again, makes it more difficult for you to lose those units in a way that would prevent you from respawning any of the Lost Guardians using that cost of victory stratagem. If you haven't seen a Warlock Conclave on the table, it's an absolute trip. It has a lot of primary objective control that you don't normally get out of Aeldari, which is really cool. And especially once you see the combination of things like Warwalkers plus Shroud Runners plus Eldrad Ulthran's Doom focused in on a single target, the things like those little, what look like Strength 5 torrent weapons start to wound a bunch of stuff on 4s with bonus AP and a bunch of auto hits. And they actually start to exhibit some pretty horrifying damage output. But with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers, all you people are amazing, and I love you. One final shout out to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to use coupon code JULYHELLO, that's JULYHELLO, all one word, to get 50 Blackstone and 20 energy when you log into the game. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.